This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
The city of Shambili is the last Turkish city along the Iran and Iraq borders. It is a living testimony to the nature of clashes between the Turkish soldiers and the PKK.
Although the geographic location of this Kurdish-dominated city qualifies it to be a prosperous city, in reality it is deprived of many basic services and infrastructure. Our reporter, Yosef Al-Sharif, visited the city and prepared the following report about the living conditions of its residents.
It looks like a safe city, sleeping between the mountains. In reality, however, problems come to this city like an uninvited guest. The PKK fighters are based behind these high mountains which mark the border between Iraq and Turkey. From there, they launch attacks against the positions of the Turkish army. Turkish military support arrives to Shambili non-stop in an image that reflects the Turkish military might. For the city's residents, this military show is provocative because they know that the Turkish forces are going to fight their own people. The PKK has influence here, which was evident by its ability to enforce a strike after its armed fighters were killed. The city's residents participated in the strike either because they wanted to be in solidarity with the PKK or because they were afraid of retaliation by its supporters in the city. The repeated clashes are translated into slow economic transactions, which seems to have become the dominant form of life here as clashes between the PKK and the Turkish army were renewed.
You see how we live. Demonstrations, closures, tensions, and continuous clashes. This is not a life. We want this violence to stop. We want to live in peace and stability.
This innocent city is burdened by a cycle of violence. In Ankara, they talk about this violence, but the people of Shambili here experience it as a reality. The city's future is threatened with the same fate it has witnessed in the past. Before 2001, it was impossible for these children to play outside their homes at this time of the day. At the time, the city was subjected to a curfew which used to start just before sunset. A new generation of unemployed Kurds, which grew up during the years of curfews and state of emergency laws, has animosity towards the Turkish state and its symbols due to the harsh living conditions during that era.
We do not want the state of emergency laws to come back. At the time, we were living in a dark prison. Oppressing us only increases the violence. It does not solve the problem.
After the state of emergency laws were lifted, the Turkish government tried to win the confidence of the Kurdish residents of the city by providing services and stopped neglecting the city economically. The government succeeded to a certain extent, and it's betting on the new generation. However, will a school and a clinic be enough to win over the new generation who were raised not to give up their Kurdish identity even if they go hungry and sick?
The Christians of Mosul are being forced to migrate. This reality was hidden in the old Christian neighborhoods of Mosul that are as old as the city itself. However, it exploded in the media this week, and it echoed throughout the Arab world. This led the government to send what it described as security reinforcement to protect the Christians of those neighborhoods. But some regarded this step as insufficient to address the larger danger at hand. The two following reports shed light on the current reality in Mosul, as well as the history of the Christian migration from the city.
Christian neighborhoods in Mosul were under sudden attack, forcing them to migrate. In a step to try and control the tense situation in the Ninawa province, the central government formed a ministerial delegation to investigate. The governor of Ninawa and his central government visited the areas that have become a refuge for these families.
This has to be implemented immediately so that we can secure the safety of the neighborhoods which house our Christian brothers and our other brothers in Mosul, and to protect them from these criminal acts.
The reassurance by the government and governor did not convince the families to return to their neighborhoods. This is in spite of their difficult living situation and their incapability of continuing in such inhumane conditions.
There is a misled group that wants to tear the seams of the Iraqi society, especially in the city of Mosul. We all know that our Christian brothers and families are an integral part of our social fabric in the city of Mosul in the Ninawa province.
The arrival of military units from the ground forces enforced by tanks and the enclosure of Christian neighborhoods leads to the conclusion that the city will undergo a new military operation. The Christians of Mosul suddenly entered into the equation of Iraq's political struggle. The quick mobilization by the government might return them to their previous condition, but it will not be able to bring them out of the cycle of struggle.
Habib al-Toumi and Faraj Asma cannot take their eyes off the TV. They are watching the news about what is happening to Iraqi Christians in Mosul and its outskirts. Al-Arabiya met the families of Habib and Faraj in the Norwegian capital of Oslo and talked with them about the current events in Iraq.
In the modern history of Iraq, there was migration, but it was not forced migration. Normal migration for certain reasons, some of which might have been political, but it was never like now. With the forced migration, either you change your religion, leave your house, or get killed.
1,300 families were forced to migrate from Mosul. They didn't even let them take their identification cards, their money, or anything, even their IDs. They took from them their mobile phones. So, there is a large difference between that migration and the current migration, or rather, this forced migration.
In your opinion, are the Christians being targeted?
Yes, they are.
By whom?
I don't know. I'll just call them criminals. The criminals want to empty Iraq of Christians. They'd emptied Christians from Basra. Many of the families in Basra migrated. The area of Dora in Baghdad is where all the Christians left from. Kirkuk also. There were some. And now it's Mosul.
كان عندنا هواي أصدقاء وجيران لحدا نتذكرهم وإن شاء الله يكونون بخير.
We had many friends and neighbors that we still remember. God willing, they are doing well. We didn't have any problems with the residents of the town. Our friends were Sunni, Shiites, Kurds. There was never a problem with the people there. On the contrary, we had very good relations, and my best friends were of all kinds. Actually, to think of it, they were all Muslims. And our relationships were very good. They were like sisters to me. The problem is with the governments that take over Iraq.
The families of Toumi and Asmaru and many Christian Iraqi families inside Mosul, outside of Iraq, and in other areas of Iraq are asking the same question. Who is responsible for what is happening to the Christians in Mosul and other areas? They are calling on the Iraqi government to provide security and answer this question. Who is responsible? Ashraf Al-Kalbra, Al-Arabiya, Oslo.
A spokesman for enforcing the security plan in Baghdad, Qasim Atta, said that the Iraqi government has intelligence information indicating that the outlaw groups are trying to commit terrorist actions in Iraq after receiving training in a neighboring country, without naming the country. In a press release, Atta said that these security agencies have the names of hundreds of wanted individuals from these gangs and groups, and that some of them have been arrested. Atta added that the security forces pursued the wanted individuals in Al-Sadr, Baladiyat, Al-Fadiyya, Al-Shula, Al-Shurta, Arabiya, and Al-Amal neighborhoods, but they escaped from these areas. He reiterated that the security forces will continue to pursue them inside Iraq and outside it with the help of the Interpol police. The American Army announced that it has dismantled a cell that was smuggling weapons in the Nisan neighborhood in southeastern Iraq. The cell was responsible for distributing potent bombs that were planted on side roads, as well as Iranian-made missiles. Colonel Philip Battaglia said that his forces have confiscated more than 8,000 pieces of weapons that were sent to Iraq from Iran, including 600 anti-tank missiles and a number of Iranian-made missiles. He added that the bombs were put together in Nisan before being transported to Baghdad and other areas.
Welcome back. With each olive harvest season, Palestinian farmers endure a bitter struggle with the settlers and Israeli army trying to harvest their olive trees on Palestinian land adjacent to Israeli settlements in the West Bank. The farmers try to shield themselves away from the settlers' assaults against them with the presence of foreign supporters. This is in addition to the apartheid wall that has eaten into the Palestinians' land that was the only source of livelihood for these families.
Palestinian
farmers are squeezed between the contentious assaults by settlers and the limited amount of time that the Israeli forces allow them to complete their harvest. This is especially the case for the farmers whose land is near the settlements and the dividing wall. Extending from the north to the south of the West Bank, farmers look as if they are stealing their own olives. They race against time, trying to harvest as much of their olives within a few days allotted to them by the Israeli army. Otherwise, they would not be allowed to enter onto their own land.
They gave us only 3 days, so we came because of that. We came and worked, but did not finish in 3 days. We need more time, no less than a week.
The army came and kicked us out. We had a quarrel with them and we refused to leave. Then they came and brought the settlers with them. Then both parties turned on us.
But the bigger problem facing the farmers is the struggle they endure with the settlers. Every year around the time of the harvest season, the settlers are let loose upon the Palestinians who own the land. Meanwhile, the farmers have called on foreign and Israeli supporters to help them reach their own land.
Palestinian people
are being kicked off of their land, dispersed, shot, killed, and imprisoned. They live on their land. This is Palestinian land. The State of Israel wants to wipe out the Palestinians. It rejects them. This is similar to what the Americans did during the 18th century when they killed the Native Americans, the original inhabitants, and they took their land.
The presence of those activists and some news crews limits heavy assaults by the settlers. However, the settlers keep waiting for opportunities to pounce on the landowners, especially in the last hours of the day, when the supporters and news cameras leave the scene. Then they start their attacks against both the people and the trees. These plots of land were spared from the malice of settlers in the wall. However, like other similar plots, they were confiscated in practice. The owners of the land cannot reach it when they need to due to the unconstrained settlers, whose assaults have expanded from stealing the olive tree harvest to terrorizing the Palestinian farmers and assaulting them. For Al Madar, this is Majid Saeed, Abu Dhabi TV, in front of Kadunim, built on the land of Kufr Kadum.
While the Gulf area is one of the regions that is least affected by the ongoing financial crisis, as indicated by international reports, every aspect of ordinary people's lives in Europe has been affected. France conducted a poll recently which indicated that 80% of the French are afraid their living conditions may deteriorate. The French opposition considers the economic plans that were announced by Nicolas Sarkozy as jumping into the world of the unknown. We leave you with Mohamed Wamoussi in Paris.
إذا كانت البنوك وسوق البورصة في فرنسا قد استقبلت بارتياح.
The French banks and stock markets were pleased with the rescue plan that was adopted by the French government. However, the French taxpayers have a different feeling. They feel that their tax money is being used in a conspiracy to bail out those who caused the financial crisis, which may lead France into a recession. This weekly market in Paris, which used to be crowded with shoppers, is almost empty today, except for the salespeople.
Honestly, we are feeling the crisis. In general, it is everywhere.
I'm 51 years old. What I'm worried about is the future of my daughter and all the young people. Are we going to leave them in debt?
Fears of the direct effects of the financial crisis on the retail market compelled the mayor of the first district in Paris to go to the streets in order to assure the shop owners directly.
Usually this market in Paris is crowded with shoppers. Now we have some of them, but not like we used to. Also, there are unpleasant economic indications which force shop owners to lower their prices.
According to the latest poll, 80% of the French are worried that the financial crisis will affect their lives. The French opposition, however, considers the economic plan that was announced by Nicolas Sarkozy as useless. Ordinary French citizens, who have begun to feel the effects of the crisis on their daily lives, are very worried by what the media has been reporting about the French financial and banking institutions. The French authorities are concerned that French citizens will withdraw their savings from their banks, causing investors to lose confidence, thus making the crisis bigger. Mohamed Wamoussi, Dubai Television, Paris.
محمد وموسى تلفزيون دبي باريس.
The fighting in Afghanistan is at its worst level in years, and now its political system is also starting to crumble. Parliamentarians in Herat are on strike. They're angry at the central government's inability to stop the violence there. This as some political leaders defect to the Taliban, taking disillusioned Afghans with them. One such man is Ghulam Yahya Akbari, the former mayor of Herat. He's now the most powerful Taliban leader in the region and says he will never give up the fight while there are foreign troops on Afghan soil. Al Jazeera gained exclusive access to Akbari's secret network of 20 Taliban bases in the mountains around Herat. Dan Nolan has this exclusive report.
It's a difficult and dangerous trek to meet Herat's most powerful Taliban commander. After a bumpy 2-hour car ride, Al Jazeera producer Kais Azimi set out on foot for another hour to find this remote base. He discovered a group of at least 60 well-armed Taliban fighters, proud to show their faces and their weapons. Some are teenagers, others old enough to be enjoying retirement, but all have left their families behind in the fight to force international troops out of Afghanistan.
I will continue jihad against the Americans who have invaded our soil until the last drop of blood remains in my body.
This rugged mountain base was used by some of the same fighters to drive out the Russians. Satellite television dishes are now one of the few luxuries here. The food is mostly dry bread, but complaints are rare.
We're not doing jihad for our stomachs. We are doing jihad for Allah.
The mountains provide enough refuge to allow rifle training. Some need more practice than others, as bullets spray in the direction of Kais and his camera. Their leader is Ghulam Yahya Akbari, a former mayor of Herat, who claims he has another 20 bases like this one.
People may wonder why we live up in the mountains. That's because we want to avoid civilian casualties and fight with guerrilla tactics.
Akbari is not interested in peace talks, and he says he'll even turn his guns against Taliban leader Mullah Omar if he negotiates with the Afghan government.
I do not believe that Mullah Omar would do that. But if They sit with the Afghan government and negotiate. Then for us, they will be like all other members of the government, and we will continue our jihad.
The group also holds 3 young policemen hostage, another sign of Akbari's increase in power since he last met with Al Jazeera.
We met them just over a month ago. On that time, they told us that they will be challenging a state government, but now it seems they are a real threat.
A spokesperson for the NATO-led international forces dismisses suggestions of an increase in Taliban support.
While they were in power, this was the worst administration in the history of this country. So why would the people of Afghanistan want the Taliban back?
NATO supports the push to find a political solution for Afghanistan rather than a military one. But even after 3 decades of war, there's still so many wanting to fight. Dan Nolan, Al Jazeera, Kabul.
On to remembering history. 47 years have passed since the massacres of October 17th. The Paris police committed crimes against the Algerians who were peacefully protesting to remove the siege and curfew imposed by the French government on the Algerian community during that time. The gruesome crime left hundreds of victims. More on this memory with Nabil Uthmania.
The Seine River is perhaps the most honest witness to the events of that black day. The blood of Algerians who were thrown in the river exceeded the amount of the heavy rainfall on that day. On October 17, 1961, the Algerians in Paris went out on peaceful demonstrations, refusing the unjust decisions of de Gaulle's government, which imposed a curfew on Algerians and no one else.
Papon, the chief of Paris's police, wanted to tighten the grip on the work of the Liberation Front there. When the curfew was imposed, we received directions to go out on peaceful demonstrations across the streets of Paris. The police met the demonstrators with unusual brutality.
ورغم براءة المسيرة التي عمت كبرى شوارع باريس
In spite of the innocence of the rally that covered the largest streets in Paris, the rabid chief of police, Maurice Papon, ordered his men to repress the protesters with violence, from firing to heavy beating. They were creative with their methods of torture, handcuffing the Algerians and throwing them in the Seine River. The incident left 400 martyred and more than 11 arrested, some of whom died in the pits of Parisian jails. In spite of these crimes, the protesters spread to the remainder of French cities carrying the same message.
On October 17th, we were about 450 women from all ages, 60 years old, 30, and infants still bottle feeding. We started yelling, calling out, "Long live Algeria!" and we took out our flags.
Reports in French newspapers were divided between supporters and contesters. Some of them praised the success and attentiveness of the French police, trying to mislead public opinion with false numbers. Others gently opposed the humanitarian crimes. However, shortly thereafter, the consequences of the crime became clear.
It began the Algerian Revolution. Anyway, God was with us, defending the Algerian homeland and identity. Thanks to God, we persevered.
The October events proved to the oppressive occupier that the Algerian people were committed to a revolution and its constituents. It was also the resounding sound that shook the walls of the United Nations. It affirmed to the butcher Papon that he might have won the battle in Paris, as he bragged on that day, but afterwards he lost the war. It was also the last stepping stone before signing the ceasefire treaty. The events left a mark of shame on Papon's forehead that history documented forever.
6 years ago, Congress granted President Bush the power to unilaterally attack Iraq. Oil was the main motivator then and is now a topic of discussion in the presidential debates. How much of U.S. oil really comes from the Middle East? And is Arab oil bad oil? Answers to these questions and more on Link TV's Mosaic Intelligence Report.
6 years ago on this date, the House and Senate voted overwhelmingly to grant President Bush the power to attack Iraq unilaterally, remove Saddam Hussein from power, and abolish that country's nuclear, chemical, and biological weaponry. I was interviewed by a reporter from the San Francisco Chronicle to explain what the Arab world thought about Bush's motives to invade Iraq, and I explained that they thought that the president was driven by oil. The invasion of Iraq proceeded, the weapons of mass destruction's claim was debunked, and the rest is history. Now, during this US presidential campaign, the subject of Arab oil keeps popping up. We have to stop sending $700 billion a year to countries that don't like us very much, Republican candidate John McCain keeps on repeating. Democratic candidate Barack Obama has also jumped on the bandwagon, declaring at a Wisconsin rally that a push for alternative energy will stop us from sending $700 billion a year to tyrants and dictators for their oil. First of all, this number is exaggerated. According to the Federal Energy Information Administration, in 2007, the U.S. imported nearly 4.9 billion barrels of oil and refined products, 16% of it from the Persian Gulf and 10% from Venezuela, countries that don't like us very much, according to John McCain. By comparison, the U.S. imported 30% of its oil products from Canada and Mexico. According to the Foreign Trade Division of the Census Bureau, the United States' entire oil imports in the first 7 months of this year totaled $284 billion from January through July. This figure was calculated when oil prices were above $100 a barrel. Therefore, there is no way we will be sending $700 billion to tyrants and dictators unless we are talking about the banking industry. Here is the fun part. McCain has been arguing that he has great plans to make America energy independent within 7, 8, 10 years if we put our minds to it. But on Wednesday night, during his last debate with Senator Obama, he said,
I believe we can, for all intents and purposes, eliminate our dependence on Middle Eastern oil and Venezuelan oil. Canadian oil is fine.
Let me get that straight. How will importing oil from Canada reduce the United States' addiction to oil? I'm not much of an energy expert to argue how fast we can wean ourselves from fossil fuel by following the McCain plan of drilling in Alaska and building nuclear plants, which take 10 years to become operational. But what I'm gathering from McCain is that there is good oil and there is bad oil. Arab oil is bad. One last thing. Remember when McCain chastised Obama about Pakistan and accused him of talking loudly?
He said that he would launch military strikes into Pakistan. Now, you don't do that. You don't say that out loud.
McCain went on saying, I'm not going to telegraph my punches, which is what Senator Obama did. And I'm going to act responsibly as I have acted responsibly throughout my military career and throughout my career in the United States Senate. Talking about telegraphing punches? If oil is not a strategic thing, Senator McCain, I'm curious what is. OPEC will be holding an emergency meeting next month. I wonder what its members will be talking about. I'm Jamal Dajani for the Mosaic Intelligence Report. To learn more about this program or to share your thoughts, visit us at linktv.org/mosaic. You can also visit my blog on the Huffington Post.
Get more news about the Middle East online at linktv.org/mosaic. The Mosaic webpage offers a complete archive of Mosaic programs, program transcripts, the Mosaic video podcast, and the Mosaic Intelligence Report, a weekly analysis of the hottest stories from the Middle East. The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible with the support of viewers like you. Thank you. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.